right, welcome to the Zoom after show. And let's just hit the record button. I think I've got it right. We'll get Mr. Maarten Albarda to join us. I think he is waiting for Mr. Maarten Albarda. If you can hear me, you need to go to bit.ly/CoronaTV after show, and then you will join the show. And we'll wait for him to come in while I let some people in. Oh, there we go, Maarten. So Maarten, I have bad news for you. The banana background has followed me into the Zoom after show, so I can only apologize to you. But that's just me being a little bit more of a sadist with respect to you. Hello, Jan. So Jan, you have a question which I think you should ask Maarten about on the organizational dynamic side. But while everybody's getting set up and settled in, Maarten, you good?
I'm good.
All right. It's interesting. We got a comment on Facebook right at the end, which basically, and I'll kind of read them to you because I can just see them. Michael Donnelly said, "Thanks, gentlemen. This has been great. Really appreciate hearing your perspective. All the best always." And to Valerie too. And John also said, "Thanks, Joe. Be well, Maarten. Best to Beverly." Who's Beverly?
I know. Better find out.
And then we got one comment that said, "I think you should avoid a political show." And it's it's really interesting because I think part of what you're saying is now is not the time for us to to be vanilla, right? Now is not the time for us to just sit back and keep quiet. And it's a tough call because I struggle with it.
Yeah, and like I said, I've struggled also with being political because it is so divisive, right? And then
by definition now, right? You say one thing, someone's going to love you, someone's going to hate.
You're going to be for or against no matter what you say. But there was this one thing, and I can't remember where I heard it or how I saw it, but it said, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, you cannot be in favor of racism, right? Whether you are far right, well, maybe if you're far right, but right. So racism can never be an acceptable behavior, no matter where you sit on sort of the political divide, and I thought that was very true. And so, for me, it is, like you said at the end, right? We're both immigrants, and there's many things that I absolutely love and adore about this country, but the one thing that I feel this country has got wrong is the inequality and, as a result, insecurity of how certain parts of society live. I live in just outside of Charlotte. Charlotte ranked last year, it was, I think, dead last on upward mobility as a city. That is a shameful position to hold. And especially for a city that is referred to as Wall Street Light, as a city that is referred to as, it is now the second largest financial city after New York City, right? And so there is so much money and so much influence, and housing prices have shot through the roof here, and it's a bit like San Francisco. You can't, well, all pre-COVID a little bit, right? But you couldn't find a home if you sort of were trying really hard, and average house price $300,000, blah blah blah, right? But there's a whole segment of society that just doesn't have it, and then COVID comes along, right? And now people are losing their health insurance because they're getting the China virus, right? so just the inequality and the unfairness of the system, and it being gamed against certain groups, that I think doesn't matter where you sit on the political spectrum, it just feels wrong, and it just feels almost un-American to me. And so do something about that. And
I have to say that, what I'm fascinated by, and I don't think we made it overly political, today on the show. I think even taking an intellectual approach. But you know, I know Tom as a philosopher kind of looks back almost like from a historical standpoint. There's a historical aspect to it, but I look at it from a strategic standpoint, and I think I'm almost thinking of what does my headline look like with a Trump win? What does it look like with a Trump loss? But it's much easier strategically to retrofit the strategy or project the retrofitted strategy, which is number one, pride, the ability to admit you were wrong, that you made a mistake, to change course, the humility versus hubris. These are personality traits. Personality traits, nothing to do with job performance, nothing to do with the facts, nothing to do with the indicators. This has to do with a person. And then the second point, which is connected to it again about being a human being, you know, we talk about being single issue voters. My single issue has always been gun control, always, and always would have been until COVID. It's almost like you can put the guns aside just for now, although ironically they're coming out again. But it came down to this idea, which ironically was always a Republican value, which was family values, and looking at your leader as a role model. And we discussed it, I think, even yesterday on the show, which is, I don't think it's good enough to be a Steve Jobs anymore. I don't think there's anything redeeming to be able to say he was great at what he did or she was great at what she did, but they were awful people. I just don't think that's good enough. And I think we as citizens must hold our leader to be someone who is as much a moral North Star as anything else.
I very much agree with that. And I think yesterday it was really interesting that whole conversation around, you know, the values and what you want to portray or you know, how do you show up? I think is absolutely true, and those things have an impact, right? And people will take their cues from that, and that's why they think certain things are or aren't acceptable behavior or acceptable to do. And what fascinates me, again, as an outsider looking in, is how could this have evolved so quickly, right? If half of the things that this president has done that you could that you know factually has done or said or whatever, if half of those things had been done by either Bill Clinton or George Bush the first, they wouldn't have made it out of their first year in office. And how can it now be that these are values that we sort of rally behind and vote for? I just don't understand how that can happen. And there was another quote that I saw the other day. It said, you know, 150 years from now, sociologists and the like and political sciences will study this era and sort of try and figure it out. It's a shame I'll be dead and won't live to see it, because I'd be fascinated to see how it gets written up and assessed, because it is just bizarro world.
Well, I mean, and the part of the answer is it happens a little bit. It happens a minuscule bit at a time until there is what people refer to as a tipping point, but it really isn't. It's the marketing idea of the just noticeable difference, right? The candy bar gets a little smaller, until one day you're looking like, what the hell happened to my Kit Kat? Or another example that people use, which is
the chairs on an airplane get the
or your waistline, which is every day it's a fraction, then one day the button pops. I will add one thing, which is one of, you know, I have two favorite philosophers. One, of course, is Tom Morris. I mean, that's obvious. Should I even say that? But another one is a guy that I just absolutely love. This man is Cornel West. It's like poetry listening to him. It's like honey coming out of his mouth. And I was just listening to a recent podcast, and they used the example of this guy, Kyle Whittinghouse, I think, walking in with this gun that was almost bigger than him, you know, being offered water. And I don't know if it was him or his co-host. And they said, can you just imagine if the roles were reversed? Can you just imagine what would happen had a black man walked in and offered a glass of water? it boggles the mind. But to me, even though we're discussing this comes back to Atticus Finch, right? Never judge a man until you walked a mile in their moccasins, reversing the roles. Like, even though we're discussing these big heady things, what we really are discussing is arrogance and humility and hubris and admitting you made a mistake. And yesterday talking about the resistance and the arrogance sometimes, that not sometimes, maybe more often than not, that men exhibit, being able to admit that you don't have all the answers, that you haven't figured it out. This is what it's coming down to. This is going to be, maybe you could argue, the most human election in the history of this country.
There's one other thing I wanted to add to that as well, which is one thing that I am trying to do is to not outright dismiss opposing views, right? And it's something I've had to learn when I was younger. I was quite an arrogant little shit. I had a boss at Leo Burnett. He was such a razor sharp mind. I admired him, and to this day, he's passed away, unfortunately. But a really sharp mind. And he and I went for dinner in London one evening, and we were talking about it. And he said one thing that he taught himself, which I immediately adopted and took on myself, was he said, I'm sitting in a presentation or in a discussion, and about halfway through, I think I figured out where they're going to go, where they're going, what they're thinking, where this thing is going to land. About halfway through, and 9 out of 10 times I got it right. What I've learned myself to do is to not halfway through then sort of say, okay, see where you're going, blah blah blah, and sort of jump in, cut it short, layer in with opinion and direction and whatever else, and I thought that was really smart. So where I'm taking that is that even in today's age, and I'm having conversations with my son about this, is that yes, you may think that somebody or somebody's opinion is absolutely stupid or absolutely makes no sense whatsoever, or is just the dumbest thing you've ever heard, but it's the dumbest thing you have ever heard. It's not necessarily the dumbest thing that person thinks he's ever said. And so one of the things that is important, as much as I disagree with a lot, I think it is important, and I was reminded of, because you said, walk in the other man's shoes, is to put yourself in that position, right? So if you live in the Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania area, and your towns are going to shit, and your family is going to shit because there's no money, and they're all on whatever prescription drugs, and everything is just negative, and here comes this guy and says, you know what, I can turn the tide, I'm going to turn the clock, it's going to be all right, right? Of course that's going to sound interesting, and of course then you're only going to hear what you want to believe, right? So it is important to not just outright dismiss, but it is important to try and understand, and then to try and figure out, okay, so what is really at issue here? What is really sort of driving it? And I think it is important to have that understanding, because it's easy to ridicule, right? And that is what both parties are doing pretty well. I'm sick and tired already of all the political ads that are sort of shown on TV every night. We're in a swing state, so it's especially heavy here. But I think it is important to try and understand the other side rather than to sort of outright dismiss it with ridicule.
What's interesting to me, and by the way, Maarten, you're in Charlotte, North Carolina?
I am.
I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Okay, that's where my son goes to school.
Oh, it's a very good school. Yeah, they gave me an honorary doctorate. I've loved them ever since. But one thing in common between yesterday's discussion and today's, we were talking about roles of masculinity yesterday, and there's what Joseph was alluding to a little bit earlier. There's this kind of leadership. You could take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. I have a friend who's a corporate coach who says, executive coach, he says the most powerful tool ever developed for personal coaching is a blank sheet of paper. Draw a line down the middle, and on one side, let's make this the leadership trade-off sheet. On one side, put the word character, and on the other side, put a lot of words: creativity, intelligence, competence, charisma. And you can go through American political history, and you can see that sometimes we've made trade-offs. We've averted our glance a little from the character issue because of the sheer intellect or the sheer charisma or the sheer whatever. In this particular case of our incumbent, it's hard to see what the trade-off was. You know, if this was a man of great intellect, if this was a man of great compassion, of great charisma, of great creativity, of great this, that, but you made the point just now that I think is very important. And I reposted on Facebook today an article by Michael Sandel, Harvard philosopher who teaches this really popular class on political theory. And Sandel was saying one thing the Republicans have come across as doing, I don't think they've actually done it, I think they've pretended to do it, is to listen to those people you just talked about. I saw somebody say, actually one day I saw 3 people say on social media, but Trump has such charisma. He's so charismatic because he draws these huge crowds of cheering people. Now, watch his performance in front of these huge crowds. You don't see anything remotely like charisma. What you see is a lightning rod for everybody's grievances, for everybody's vices, for everybody's, poor me. And he pretended to listen. I don't think he did listen. Mm-mm. And I don't think he would have the first clue about a solution to the problems he heard people talking about. But he said, I hear you. I hear you. I'm here and I'm listening. Whether that was true or not didn't matter because people were so desperate to hear somebody say that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Sandel makes this point that American politics has become so meritocracy based, so that Biden actually has a chance to break through to those same folks because he's one of the first Democrats we've put up for high office who doesn't have an Ivy League degree. He went to an ordinary school. He didn't go to an Ivy League school. He's not a Harvard guy. He's not a Yale guy. And we've packed politics on the other side of the aisle with Ivy League people that so many of the folks with hardships and grievances can't relate to. Mm-hmm. And so this coming across, Bill Clinton, I feel your pain, coming across listening, empathy, the humility and somebody made the point, was it yesterday again, the point about humility? It's not necessarily a matter of lowering yourself to somebody else. It's a matter of taking their perspective and treating it
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a matter of perspective. So if the people with character can now, and I say the people, because we're not just talking about a presidential race, we're talking about other races as well, where we need people with character voted for in November. If they can approach their voters and say, look, I care about your perspective. I want to help you with what your needs really are. That could be revolutionary. And maybe the pendulum swing, having gone in this terrible direction, will wake up the people who actually have the character to know what sells in the electoral realm. It's this listening. It's this coming across as caring. But then if you can even show beyond that in action that you do care, that's when you solidify the support. That's at least what gives me hope for all this.
All they need to do is all show up then as well, right?
All show up. Yeah. You're exactly right. My next door neighbor, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just remember your next door neighbor, but I was thinking of the 0 score for Biden, and it's tricky because when you look at the Z of zealots, advocacy, love and hate, as opposed to indifference, I would say that in a way, just like 4 years ago was in many respects propelled by, lesser of evils. There was a tremendous amount of disdain and hatred for Hillary, tremendous, enough for her not to have been elected. But I think in a way you have love, if it's not love for Biden and Biden's principles and Biden for democratic values and platform, there is this now, the push away, the push off from Trump. So, I don't really like him, but I definitely don't like the other guy.
Right.
So that's the Z. The E to me is interesting because you don't see from Howard Dean to Barack Obama to Donald Trump, you don't see digital, you don't see social, you don't see You don't see technology-enabled innovation or entrepreneurship. Strategically, the only thing we might see there, and you have to like reach a little bit, is almost this idea of, hey, listen, we're not going to lose this. We're just going to go back to the bunker and just keep quiet, and just let him sink the ship himself, which is a dangerous strategy to a degree, but I don't see much there. So I'm a little worried about the E. The R of retention, again, it's a little bit more passive, and that's where, I mean, Maarten, you just hit the nail on the head. This is just going to come down to one thing and one thing only. It's enough people voting that can vote, that are allowed to vote,
Yep.
that in fact do vote, whether you call that energy. So the R of retention, I mean, I don't know that the Democrats, again, play as much to the base. In fact, the base is a little fractured, you know, especially when you go too left from a progressive standpoint. And then you've got the O of owned assets. And again, I'm not really sure that you're seeing a huge amount of landlord-driven marketing and promotion. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's I don't know what you guys think in terms of scoring.
I think the only area where I would disagree with you a little bit is that I think in terms of, and I don't know if it fits in the retention or in the zealots part, but I think he is making a play for some of the traditional bases and trying to show some of those traditional bases, right? Unions, blue collar workers, minorities, etc., to sort of show, hey,
no, that's a good point.
That that didn't really work right. So the last 4 years haven't really worked for you, and now with Corona, that's even more clear, right? If you are considered a essential worker, right, you've gotten a double whammy against you, right? You're working for shit all money, and and we're exposing you to the most dangerous of viruses around right now, and so that's not really working out for you. So I think he is, but I don't know if that is the zealots or the retention part, but it's sort of in that space.
I think he's got two owned assets, and that is, well, you could say social justice, but I would just go with justice. Mm-hmm. And the other one is science. Mm-hmm. I think those are two assets that have just risen in a wave that we probably won't understand until after the election. People who are so fed up, and this is people who are, this isn't that much of an emotional thing. It's what are we doing, and how could we reject what we know is so true, even at face value, and the hell with conspiracy theories. I've got to believe that there's an overwhelming majority of people who are swayed by just fed up with that. So science and then justice. There's just another overwhelming sense that there's not justice on many levels, the primary one, social. And I think those two are assets in Biden's camp.
And they can create a zealotry. I mean, a zealotry doesn't have to be Joe Biden, charismatic Superman, but he represents justice and decency and truth and a calm hand at the wheel, and so many things that people are almost becoming desperate for now, right? I mean, I've never seen people talk about decency so much in my life as I have in the last few weeks. You know, contrasting the two conventions, contrasting the two individuals, and so that offers a possibility for kind of a zealotry that doesn't necessarily come from a persona, you know, Che Guevara or something, that doesn't necessarily come from a cause, one cause. Although look at all the causes Biden has on his side now, from climate change to racial justice. I mean, I was going to mention my neighbor is president of Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte, which is a historically Black college. And he has a house down here in Wilmington, and he comes down on weekends and vacations. And we talked a lot, at least before the pandemic, about how all these things matter in his community, in the community of his students, in his school. And it's not just the racial issues, although those are huge. Like what you said about economic lack of upward mobile opportunity in Charlotte, which is true of many cities. and climate change. My neighbor's just as concerned about climate change as about racial justice. So
well, you should be in Wilmington. You'll be underwater pretty soon.
yeah, right. That's right. Our property values will be sinking along with the land. But so I think all these issues, there are enough issues here that people are really committed to, like young people who are already committed to climate, resisting climate change. Now they're waking up to the racial injustices. And this bodes well, I think, for a new level of zealotry that just looking at Joe Biden and hearing his tones of voice and knowing his history, you know, people's hair didn't catch on fire right away, you know, but now that he embodies all these things that people are enthusiastic about, he becomes the lightning rod for the good things. He becomes the lightning rod for not the grievances, but the concern, the moral concerns. And I see that as potentially working hugely in his favor if we have any kind of positive view of human nature whatsoever.
I want to just, by the way, Tom, you again show us how you're becoming a marketer by the day, hanging out with us ruffians. But Maarten, that was a great point. Jan, a great point. Tom, a great point. Let me just summarize this, because I think you helped crystallize a few things really, really amazingly. First of all, in no particular order, the R of retention, if we're using some marketing techniques, is what we really are talking about is flipping the funnel, right? In one of my other books, we're talking about churn and attrition. We're talking about competitive conquesting. And we're talking about the fact that the base itself might be intact, but it's shrunk, no doubt, a little bit from on the Trump side. But the actual new base is growing. And where's that coming from? It's coming from the indifference, which are the independents. So that's an interesting point. The other thing is that I was thinking is, and I agree with your points, with your builds, and the O of owned assets. One of the O, as we talk about in the book, your people, your products, your packaging, your content, your clothing, your real estate, your trucks, but data, customer service is one, data is another. And the data here is the data that shows the COVID stats. There is that kind of data, which is very hard to spin, even though they're trying to spin it, that only 6% of deaths, in fact, are COVID, or pure COVID, which we all know is not true. Now, another owned asset, again, is people and packaging and clothing. And I think this applies to both sides, right? The people that are protesting, you have the small element trying to be magnified, the looters, right? But you have a lot of people protesting, and that is the issue that Jan talks about, which is justice and science, right? And I loved how Tom then said, but these are informing now a new zealotry. And this is my summary here, that strategically this is coming down to two things. One is, this is a referential referendum in a way, that this is less about absolute binary, one or the other. This is absolutely the most referential election in terms of voting for, you are voting for and you are voting against at the same time, more than ever before. But the other one, and I think this is the most significant one, is that whereas the one side will be about a person, a personality, the other is about we the people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the point that you guys made so beautifully. The social justice, these social causes, it's all of us together, it's the people, that's where the zealotry is occurring. And in a way, Biden may not be saying it, but we don't need him. We don't need the Biden show. We don't want any one man or one woman band anymore. We want someone to represent us, we the people. And I think that is the interesting, tide that will float all boats.
And see, what's interesting about that, Trump is opaque, Biden is transparent. Biden is transparent to values, Biden is transparent to issues, Biden is transparent to the interests of people beyond his small circle. Trump is opaque, and that's the outcome of every narcissist, especially a malignant narcissist. He's not open to any of these other things unless they can be manipulated and used for his purposes. And I think that's so smart, what you just said, Joseph, that I look at issues like my daughter and my granddaughter marched for the first time right after the 2016 election, a women's march. Now, we're not even talking about women's issues right now, but I think women are just as concerned about misogyny and about taking rights and powers away from women and an encroaching patriarchy and all those kinds of issues that we guys on the screen right now sometimes forget to talk about. But that's another source of a new zealotry. And so you see the margins changing with suburban housewives and with college educated, even getting bigger numbers of women, and non-college educated women, the numbers starting to turn around a little bit in favor of Biden, because he's transparent to all these issues. He allows these issues to come in. He lets them flow through him. And it is a we the people thing. We all the people, and all these things that matter. And Democrats are accused sometimes of being just a pastiche of special interest groups. Everybody's got their own grievances, and the Democrats say everybody with grievances come in. But we've kind of seen a polar switch with that recently. So now it's the other side that has the grievance groups, the white supremacists, the guys who don't want to ever pay taxes, the libertarians who say don't tread on me. It's all these grievance groups on the other side. So that's the fascinating thing about American politics, and how parties can shift and switch over time as a reflection of the people who rise within the parties.
I saw today a fascinating statistic, which was that amongst military personnel, Trump is beginning to lose his base, and actually Biden has kept his base steady. So he hasn't dropped, he hasn't gained, but he hasn't dropped. So he's not winning the ones that are souring on Trump. I think is what I took away from it. But the line for Trump support is sort of trending south, which was interesting as well. But I think if you look at the demographic makeup of military, is far different from other uniformed groups, and so I think that's probably in part informed by that.
And Biden's comeback, some people thought it was a few days too late, but Biden's speech the other day I thought was brilliant.
The one in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And his theme of a little bit like a Reagan theme of, do you feel, what was Reagan's, do you feel better off 4 years, or, better off now than you were 4 years ago?
Right.
And Biden was, do you think you're going to feel safer in a Trump presidency?
By the way, I find it also really interesting that Joseph and I spent an hour talking about a number of things, and this is the thing that we're now talking about in the after show. It's just maybe that was the reason for the comment, Joseph, for that person that placed the comment about let's not make it political or something like that.
Well,
but you
and look, I know him, and he this may come as a shock to you guys, but he's a Trump supporter. But
this is his answer.
But here's the thing. I'm thinking to myself, so a couple things. One is, I don't know how you could be watching this if people are watching on YouTube and disagree with this. I don't know how you can. And you can be like, but the judges, but this, but like what? Like, but it's like, seriously, how can you counter this when ethics, morality, decency, empathy are really on the kind of ballots. But there's another thing. I'll tell you why we're talking about this, because we all have powers and superpowers. If we have a voice, whether it's through the pen, whether we're authors, whether we're speakers, whether we're professionals, and we have to choose to use our powers for good. And good doesn't mean Democrat or Republican. Good means for the betterment of society, for humankind. But there's another thing, and I keep coming back to what you said, Maarten, this idea of interesting without action is just interesting. You've experienced this in the most personal and direct way, which is your wife is African American. Your wife is a Black woman. And if not for that, look, you're a Dutchman. The Dutch are very liberal and open-minded. But if not for that,
also great slave drivers, by the way, in the 17th century. A lot of the wealth at the time was
thank you for correcting that. Otherwise, I would have slipped on a banana peel. But maybe at least this is, there's not a full circle, but at least a progression and an evolution, right? Being able to recognize and say, this is who we were and where we were, and we've moved on and moved forward. But I think that it's just a key insight here, which is we live in the cities, we live in the suburbs, we live on the coast. How would we ever experience this firsthand, other than what the media tells us or what we see on social media? And let's be honest, we don't even know what to believe anymore because of deep faking and
the video
news.
That the deputy White House chief of staff just sent out, which purported to show Joe Biden falling asleep during a news interview. Have you guys seen that?
Yeah, and it was Harry Belafonte.
It was a fake video, right? And 2 million people watched it. And people were writing, a guy went to UNC Chapel Hill on the same scholarship I went on. He's a writer for the New York Times. And he said today in his newsletter, all his friends are writing him saying, whoa, is this real? Did Biden really fall asleep on a television interview? And this guy has smart friends. Frank Bruni of the New York Times, he has smart friends. So if his friends were worried that Joe Biden was actually falling asleep during a TV interview, how many people out there in America?
Why wasn't expect to see it on Hannity tonight?
Why wasn't there a fact check on that on YouTube or Facebook or anything?
Right, they pulled it after 2 million people watched it. After 2 million people watched, they finally pulled it. And so deep fakes, right? So what can we believe?
I think more effective than pulling it is to, in some cases, leave it with a big, let people know that this was put there falsely.
This is what you're right. I mean, there's something to be, otherwise we become a republic represented by Joseph's backdrop there, a banana republic, right? Not in the clothing sense, but in the sense of all these lies being used.
And one of the problems
Joseph, I got a text this morning from a famous Southern novelist who's known for his humorous books, a guy named Clyde Edgerton. And he told me he's teaching a class for the first time. He's putting together a class on writing for the public good. That's what you're doing right here on internet TV for the public good. So for anybody who says don't talk politics, well, look, if you want to serve the public good with respect to hope and optimism and business and life, and you touch everything here. And how can you touch everything else without touching the issues that impinge on our current politics, which are moral issues, which are values issues, right? Big things, and you're doing it for the public good.
But by the way, I love what Jan said, which is the video should continue with a big, almost like cigarette warning on it. And the other one is just, kind of, this goes back to my concept of embracing your heresy. Something that I developed in Bultisak is I mean, I'm not recommending this, but conceptually, Joe Biden actually embraces the title of Sleepy Joe, which is, I'm Sleepy Joe. And what we need right now is not someone to be asleep, but what we don't want any more drama, no more, clearly not to Sleepy Joe, but it's this idea of no more drama.
I think the word you're looking for is malarkey.
No more malarkey. But that's another way of looking at it, which is it's soul destroying and draining when constantly, because of all the disinformation and the depositioning, that everything you do has to be, countering all the untruths in order then to be able to talk about what you really want to talk about. And it's hard.
And ever taken up so much of our day ever for the last 3.5 years. So much of your neural capacity and activity has been given over to it's not just the issue, it's not just the craziness of the day. it's the scandal of the hour almost.
Right.
That's interesting. You say that. This is something I've also talked to my son about. I said I have never ever in my life lived at a time where the number of scandals and issues and derailments sort of happened at the speed and scale as with it is happening right now. And so I also said to him, I am not sure that this is now normal or whether this is really an exception and we'll go back to normal, but we'll just have to wait and see. But it is certainly not something I've ever experienced before.
I had a thought, a little moment of clarity, which is, here's my question to people. This one I'm going to actually start to say when I'm encountering that difference of opinion. Do you know what's going to change once Donald Trump loses in November? What will change in terms of the level of rhetoric and discourse and disinformation and tweets, etc.? You know what the answer is?
Nothing.
Nothing. And that shows you that this had nothing to do with running the country. It had everything to do with him. It was all about him. Nothing will change. Every day will be additional tweets and additional controversies and additional spinning. And if the media chooses to cover him, nothing will change, because that's what we want, right? We want 24 hours. My wife actually said to me today, don't say his name. Not because the name is bad, but because she's like, enough already. Let's just have one day where you don't have to talk about what he said and what he did and can you believe and whatever. We're all exhausted. What if we all pulled our superpowers together, as a country, to solve real problems?
Yeah, I think that might be a reason why it does go full blue wave, because I think there's a feeling that without any McCains, or not enough McCains on the red side, no one has risen up to say, look, this is wrong in this area. And although I'm for a Republican platform for these reasons, in this area, this is wrong, and I won't abide by it. Not enough of that has happened. And so there's a sense of going behind that curtain or in your mail-in vote and saying, I don't get a sense of real, again, justice there and real understanding of science on just a whole on a whole level here, on a whole group. So I'm gonna not get specific and pinpoint those who ought to get elected. And even though they're red and I'm blue, I'm just going to go all blue. And also a feeling of we've got to get things done.
Right.
I want to make one more point, and I'm just trying to find it. I'm looking, I can't see it right now, but I saw someone had posted all the Republican, members of Congress that have now pledged to, or endorsed Joe Biden. Oh, yeah. And I think it's just it's like maybe 4 or 5 senators, but the rest of them are representatives. But we've been discussing strategy today, and we discussed churn and attrition, whatever. But timing is everything. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, just throwing it out there, whether a lot of this is all going to be time released, so that the Democrats will peak at the right time. Because 4 years ago, the opposite happened, right? 10 days before Comey comes out, and the bottom fell out for the most part of Hillary's campaign. But I think what's happening there, another book is, just been released today. You're going to see more books, you're going to see more bombshells, and you're going to see more defection. And I think what's really going to happen, and I'm just, again, speculating, that there are, many members of the Republican Party may very well mutiny right at the 11th hour when there is not enough time for Trump to go after them or to sway people against them, especially if they're up for re-election. I just wonder whether, because one of the things I'll tell you I was most nervous about were all these leads, these massive leads like 2 weeks ago. And now it seems like we've come back, because the worst thing that can clearly happen is complacency. Well, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I don't think that might happen for this reason. Personality. I don't think that Republicans feel that Biden is a person who will seek retribution from those who don't vote for him or support him. Yet they believe that, of course, Trump will. So to stick your neck out, even at the last minute, and say, fuck you, Trump, could hurt them severely. Whereas to go against Biden, Biden's going to, say, except for Trump, I hope, not all is forgiven, but let's move forward.
I think that's probably true. Yeah, I think in the end, it is all going to come down to show up. And that is, as I mentioned. So,
if you're allowed to, if you're not turned away, and
your mailbox is still standing on the corner of the street. But
I think I'm gonna, so here's what I'm gonna do today is this after show. I think we discussed a lot of interesting things, as I said, even from a strategic standpoint and a marketing standpoint. And I would say, if you guys know people that are connected in the Democratic Party, send this file to them, whether they're donors or, let somebody watch the stuff. Because I think I have to say, I think there was a lot of really interesting, at least from a strategic and a positioning standpoint.
Yeah, there were two other things I was going to mention. We had talked, so who does do it well, right, other than Joe Biden and his rating. And I had ventured, even though I not necessarily agree with everything that she says, but I think how AOC, as she is now known, sort of scores on the zerometer, I think is really high, because I think if there's that's another good example of sort of leading by example, but also leading by, thank God for that.
Yeah, I figured you deserve me to change it back.
But leading the other ones and showing sort of learning by doing, etc. She has taught apparently a lot of members of Congress and the House on sort of the whole social media usage. I think
she's amazing. Yeah,
she does that incredibly smart, and I don't know anything really. I don't know that she studied for it or anything, but she just feels how to do it and what to do, and the way she delivers social media content, I think is very smart.
And I don't know if you guys saw it. It was an article by an FBI guy who profiles body language. He analyzed the both conventions and their speakers, and she was the only one he gave perfect marks to.
Okay.
For everything she did in terms of her body language, as well as he said he watched the conventions without sound and then rewatched them with sound, and everything she did was just done perfectly. She's a pretty remarkable young woman. Why she's had so many haters in the early days, because they realize that she has potential political power.
I think those haters are still out there. If Lily from AT&T has haters, then I'm sure she does them.
Listen, and that is a perfect segue away from politics to say, I really, really dislike Lily from AT&T.
Oh, really?
And it was that ad that says, "Hey, it's Lily. I'm back. I'm working from home. Here's a tip. The new iPhone is available for $7.99." I'm like, that's not a tip. That's not a tip at all. That's not helping me at all. And it was just, I was like, Lily, you've moved over to the dark side.
Can you remember?
Hashtag not my spokesperson.
So first of all, I'm not an AT&T person. I'm a T-Mobile person. But can you remember her very first commercial that she did was the bedazzling one?
Yeah.
If I have ever seen Oscar-worthy delivery of a line, then it was in that commercial, how she sort of confessed to being a bedazzler. I thought that was she had me at that one, and so
that's only because you're a bedazzler too. You bedazzled us today.
Takes one to know one. No, the one thing that I wanted to mention before I have to go is that yesterday, it wasn't so much visible today, but yesterday I noticed that at least 3 people had a guitar in their background. And I thought that that was an interesting conclusion.
I've got,
Yeah, see there. Yeah, so you were one of them, but there were a couple of others.
yeah.
And so I was wondering what the significance of the guitar in the background is.
Look at this. Look at this. That's
Yep.
great. You too, huh?
I don't know how to play it, but I mean, you know,
It's a great prop, though, isn't
But
it?
I think that's the thing. I think most of those people that have a guitar in the background don't know how to play it, but they just want to have that visual.
Yeah,
So.
no, that's
I can
great.
play a few. I can play a few chords. You know, I played "Wonderful Tonight" Clapton when I did my School of Rock, but
Oh,
now I've forgotten them. I
That's
gotta.
so funny.
I
I
can
have
do
to have
D,
them.
C,
I played in
G.
I played in bands before I became a philosopher. So I have to have, right now, I think I've got 3 guitars in my study and 1 amplifier. And I take breaks throughout the day. And I'll just, my granddaughter lives with us and she's doing Zoom school, high school. So I have to turn down the volume, you know, but I'll shut my door
philosophers
and play. That keeps me sane, you know. It's moments of joy through the day, you know, with the guitar.
So
So
let me just do a quick. So Jaffe has one. Jan, do you have a guitar in your background somewhere?
I don't have it in my background though.
Joey did, and who else did? Somebody had one hanging on the wall.
I think it was actually your speaker. I forget his name from yesterday. Aiden had one as well.
Did he have one?
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of our normal crew after
Doesn't Garfield have a ukulele too?
ukulele?
Ukulele doesn't count.
I love ukulele.
It's funny. That's like saying bananas are not fruit. Come on.
Well, I
Jan, you gotta get a
don't
guitar
disagree
on
with
the
that.
wall,
They're
I
just not very good.
All right, I am going to stop this on. I'm
this-
going to
on this bombshell.
stop the madness.